Thank you, Martin.
Tout le monde qui a...
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to all of those who organised the symposium and all of those who invited us here and who welcomed us here, who programmed the gathering, including the chefs, the translators, and all of that.
Pandemic, all the anxiety that has come with it, the loss that many of us also here have experienced, that these moments of encounter and the experience of care amongst one another are really important, are a real gift. So it's a great pleasure to share these days with you. I have the feeling that there's a little bit of a crackling sound. It's rubbing on my beard. It is the non-human component to the speaking. Is this better? Je n'ai pas compris. Ah, je prends l'autre micro. Ok. Mais je commence maintenant comme ça. Je continue. Ok. So, we are here to speak about the realities of science fiction. And of course, when we address the impact of science fiction in constructing, in shaping our reality, it's often blockbuster cinema that comes to mind. And now I understand why everyone is confused about this. Is it the green button? C'est le bouton vert. Presque. Presque. Ouais, voilà. Hollywood cinema comes to mind when it comes to the role of science fiction in shaping our reality. So we think of the body scan in the film Running Man from 1987, which is now a structural part of all airport life. The electric vehicles in the film Gattaca from 1997 is now essentially a Tesla monopoly. Or Tom Cruise's use of touchscreens in Minority Report, which prefigured which prefigured the iPhone and the iPad. But of course, this is not an organic consequence of science fiction culture. Tech industry and product designers, they product place technology that they are developing within major science fiction productions. So it's not like organically we think of the future first through culture and then it suddenly arrives. There's an active element of product placement. Through popular culture, we get trained in recognizing products that are not yet launched into the market, but once they are instantly familiar. And the first time we saw an iPhone or a touchscreen, we knew already how it worked because we had been trained and conditioned into its use before. So when we think of products, oh, I would really like the image. C'est possible de faire l'image en plein écran? Merci. So if we think of product designers like Sid Mead, non, pas mon image, oui, merci. If we think of product designers like Sid Mead, who developed the sceneries for, amongst others, Blade Runner, Tron, Tomorrowland. This is an image from the scenery sketch of Tomorrowland, which is actually a great example because it is a film that is modeled as a kind of expanded world fair. A world fair that works as an accelerated exercise in the product placement of the future, or in product placing the future. So Sid Mead, he always littered his science fiction with his industrially designed and industrially funded cars and smart city architectures, essentially the urban centers of the global north today. So our present, the future past, or the past future, was product placed. In that sense, mainstream science fiction operates in the length of what Shoshana Zuboff has described as the predictive markets of surveillance capitalism. So that means that the point today is no longer to mine the data of past behaviors to anticipate on future consumption patterns. The point is to algorithmically predict future behaviors to secure future markets. Not only water will become commodities or air, but the future itself is a commodity and is designed as such. Ah, c'est le pardon. Oui. Merci. These examples These examples are, of course, also proof of the relative power of art and design to develop world-making morphologies of the future, imaginaries of the future, even though the way they are imagined is weaponized by corporate, by military, and by state power to engineer futures that are desirable to their interests. And I think we just had a discussion with Virginie that touches on exactly this issue, the instrumentalization of imaginaries, of collective imaginaries by dominant structures of power, like the Ministry of Defense. Let's not forget, in this case also, that major Hollywood productions, like Iron Man, Transformers, or I Am Legend, have relied on subsidization by the Pentagon's Entertainment Liaison Office for decades. So this is the cultural department of the Pentagon, the American military. And knowing this, how could we ever expect that their dominant cultural output, their construction of the future, could challenge the status quo in any meaningful way? For those interested, the director of the Pentagon Entertainment Liaison Office, his name is Philip M. Straub. And because a lot of Hollywood productions that have been subsidized by the Pentagon credit him as a thank you, if you type in Philip M. Straub on the IMDb database, you will get a really large set of examples of Pentagon-subsidized Hollywood cinema. So what is an emancipatory cosmic fiction that does not reinforce the interests of dominant power, but would contribute to its imaginative competences in transformative many-world building? And when I use the term many-world, also in the title of my talk, I mean the construction of reality that honors a world of many worlds, following the famous declaration of the Zapatista Army of National Liberation. I think it touches also on the question of the role of cosmic fiction in creating what Tristan just referenced as contre-pouvoir, counterpower. I want to discuss some of these examples of emancipatory cosmic fiction and the way that they have directly influenced, shaped my own organizational art practice. And when I speak of organizational art, I mean the way that I try to think of artworks as alternative institutions. So an artwork as an alternative parliament, an artwork as an alternative biosphere, an artwork as a climate court, as an alternative court. Artworks, in other words, that do not only attempt to imagine the future differently, but try to organize the future anew. Now, I am an artist and cultural worker invested in egalitarian life forms, meaning egalitarian forms of living. So, of course, the novel Red Star, the previous image was the original cover, the novel Red Star from 1908, written by the Russian philosopher and revolutionary Alexander Bogdanov, is the foundation in my own dialogue with the history of cosmic fiction. In Bogdanov's book, Comrade Leonid is visited by a Martian revolutionary just after the failed Moscow uprising of 1905. Leonid then travels with the Martian comrade to the Red Planet, of course, the Red Planet, which other planet, and discovers that on Mars the communist revolution has actually already taken place. On communist Mars, Leonid witnesses that factory labor is voluntary, workers do not commit to one single craft, but circulate continuously between occupations. In the children's colony, different generations of young comrades educate one another and live collectively without their biological parents. Public monuments and art displays are conceived as collective achievements and not as individual masterpieces. But despite these emancipatory transformations of society, Martian communist society harbors a great dilemma. Due to overpopulation and excessive resource extraction, a debate has ensued on whether communist Mars should colonize capitalist Earth in order to compensate for its overly extractive endeavors on the planet Mars itself. So Bogdanov's interplanetary explorations, interplanetary speculations, explore the potentials of communist society in terms of a reorganization of labor, reorganization of our social, cultural, sexual, gender relations, but additionally he also scripts the ecological dilemmas inherent to mass industrialization that we are confronted with today. In contrast, contemporary neo-colonial, extractivist and corporatist interplanetary objectives are blatantly clear. Multinational corporations like SpaceX or Blue Origin speak shamelessly of Mars colonization and declare humans engaged in these missions as pioneers to terraform a dead planet. And such discourses, of course, reproduces and exports the worst of colonial and imperialist histories, mimicking the claim of terra nullius, declaring someone's land as nobody's land. It has been used for centuries to legitimize the erasure of indigenous histories and indigenous lives. The incredible beauty of Bogdanov's endeavor, in contrast, the novel Red Star, is that through a literary work, he plants a complex egalitarian time seed. On one hand, he projects the possibility of an egalitarian interplanetary future. But this time seed, the time seed he plants in the form of a novel, also includes dilemma and contradiction. In this case, relating to the communist dependency on extractive industrial labor, that is in many ways antithetical to an emancipatory reading of communism itself. For radical equality to be literarily universal, it must apply to everything and everyone. There are no dead planets. There are only living, comradely worlds. My project, Interplanetary Species Society, that you can see here, takes the form of an alternative experimental biosphere, which calls for humans to think of ourselves as guests, not pioneers, and to engage in interplanetary cooperation rather than colonization. And most of all, to engage our thinking of interplanetarism into a form of intraplanetarism, meaning a deepening of our role and comradely bonds within ecologies that sustain us on Earth. It is an attempt to continue the work of planting egalitarian time seeds by Bogdanov, creating artworks as time machines, in opposition to the space-faring trillionaire elite that leaves us nothing but a future of scorched Earth behind. Now, Interplanetary Species Society, the experimental biosphere that we constructed, manifested in the Reaktorhallen, which is a former underground nuclear facility in Stockholm. And it seemed relevant to me that the facility was once built underground to protect the surface from radiation, whereas in the future, in the course of the unfolding climate collapse, we will be forced underground, deeper within Earth, intraplanetary, to protect ourselves from the radiation of the surface. So there's a fundamental détournement that takes place. The biospheres gathered humans together with neo-constructivist ammonites, proletarian plants, and meteorites, to form an assembly not only of the ecologies of our present, but also with those of the deep past. The neo-constructivist ammonites, for example, are fossils of ammonites, a family of octopus and squid that lived between 300 and 66 million years ago and that perished in the fifth mass extinction. Now, it might seem that human life and ammonite life are vastly different in terms of our lived time, our organic composition, but the ammonites were witnesses to the fifth mass extinction, just as we are witnessing the sixth mass extinction. They are fossils, and we are fossils in the making. Further, the ammonites are literally the fossils inside of fossil fuel, millions of years of aggregated, decomposed bodies of animals and plants that racial ecocidal capitalism burns to accelerate movement in the present, simultaneously undoing the possibility of a future in which humans can survive in a meaningful way. The constructivist bodies and slogans of the ammonites, of course, refer to the work of constructivist and productivist artists in the Russian Revolution. And that might seem paradoxical, as these artists embraced the industrial paradigm. But artists like Popova, Stepanova, Rodchenko also developed a theory they refer to as the object as comrade. The idea is, that they proposed, is that in revolution, commodities don't just become collective property, but they become revolutionary agents in their own right. In Interplanetary Species Society, we try to expand that proposition of the non-human comrade into the political recognition of the object as comrade, expanding it into the political recognition of the non-human comrade, with whom we share an ecology from deep past to the present and an urgent struggle to enable deep futures. Some of the neo-constructivist Ammonite slogans are themselves derived from emancipatory science fiction, emancipatory cosmic fiction, such as the text Hyper-Empathy Now, which references Octavia Butler's diptych Parable of the Sower from 1993 and Parable of the Talents from 1998. It was referenced yesterday as well. In Butler's novels, we follow Lauren Olamina, who is afflicted by hyper-empathy syndrome, which brings one to feel the physical pain of others who are in direct proximity. Olamina attempts to build a new secular religious earth seed community in a future United States that is plagued by ecological collapse, corporate authoritarianism, and evangelical extremism. So basically the United States that we all know. Despite utter planetary devastation and perpetual civil war, Olamina insists that her planned earth seed communities are not to remain autonomous islands, but must work to transform humans into an interplanetary species to engage with other living worlds, which is another slogan in the work, living worlds. Butler's conceptualization of hyperempathy is essential in order to establish new comradely bonds between human and non-human ecosystem workers. Here's a beautiful note from the Butler archive that's a note to herself, a set of, almost represented as a set of slogans that really tries to create a kind of embodied sense of what hyperempathy means. Make people feel. The propagation of hyperempathy also applies to the proletarian plans in the Interplanetary Species Society biosphere, which consists of images from historical posters, historical socialist posters, in which it's not the heroic human workers, but plants themselves, who become the main proletarian agents. Of course, such a recognition of non-human workers has very little to do with the reality of mass agricultural and industrialist embrace of real existing socialism. But these poster images, or the artists that made the poster images, they plant this concept as a time seed. It calls on the awareness that the egalitarian socialist paradigm must apply to all ecosystem workers, plants included. In the center of the biosphere, three meteorites. This is the hole where the nuclear reactor used to be. 3 meteorites, more than 4.5 billion years old. So 3 objects that existed before Earth itself, the surface of Earth itself on which they are lying now, or in this image, existed. And so it's a kind of gaze from deep time, staring back into from the hole where our nuclear-driven future used to be. In other organizational artwork, I encounter cosmic fiction as a fellow traveler, a fellow time seed working similar fields, but with different strategies. That was my experience when reading Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry of the Future from 2020, a near-future climate fiction that tells the story of an organization, the Ministry of the Future, tasked with putting to practice the principles of the Paris Climate Accord. The ministry's focus is to defend the rights of unborn humans and other ecosystem workers of the future to achieve a fundamental equality of life across different periods of time. The Ministry of the Future's introduction of the carbon coin, a new currency that monetizes not burning fossil fuels. So it basically means that the more carbon is left in the ground, the more capital one creates. Might be one of the book's most inventive and simultaneously problematic efforts to rethink our collective survival. When reading Ministry of the Future, this is a beautiful article in which Kim Stanley Robinson makes the case for, amongst others, the carbon coin. Also shows how progressive or emancipatory forms of science fiction can impact reality in a rather direct way. When reading Ministry of the Future, I had already been working with lawyer, academic and writer Radha D'Souza for a year in preparing our Court for Intergenerational Climate Crimes, the CICC, a more than human tribunal that prosecutes climate criminals in the form of transnational corporations and states. The CICC confronts or tries to confront a fundamental absence in existing legal institutions, namely the category of the future. Courts can prosecute the present based on evidence past, but they cannot in the present prosecute the future violence imposed upon unborn humans, unborn plants, unborn animals. So transnational corporations like Unilever, ING or Airbus, with the complicity of states, they can store their ecocidal crimes in the future. They can store their crimes in time because the future has no jurisdiction. The Intergenerational Climate Crimes Act, drafted by Radha D'Souza, my collaborator, is the legal foundation of the CICC. It calls for a redefinition of time in the struggle for climate justice. Past, present, and future are interdependent, and they are radically equal. Ancestors of the future, which is us, unborn successors, must be recognized as equal and simultaneously present. And that's how we consider it in the public hearings that we will be holding next week from Thursday onwards against ING, Airbus and Unilever and the Dutch state. The form of the court, and I showed you a few images already, consists itself of evidence of intergenerational climate crimes. It's populated by extinct animals, extinct plants, as well as ammonite fossils. At the center of the court, a large fossil is placed in a hexagonal shaped pool of refined oil, creating a maddening chronopolitical arena in which a clash between millions of years of inherited Earth memories and a burning present manifests. An arena that aims to challenge us, to demand not just 2 or 3 generations more, but to demand 1 million more years. Surrounding the center of the court, signs are raised depicting extinct animals placed on a radiant yellow background, each termed comrade, in a different, sometimes near extinct language, emphasizing that extinction of animals and plant life goes hand in hand with cultural forms of extinction. In between them, woven banners of extinct plants are present, each equally termed comrade. And upon closer look of these woven banners of the extinct plants, one might see that the outer forms of the plants are maintained through small tapes and wires, traces of the attempts by scientists to maintain the ghostly shapes of these massacred ecosystem workers. Violent reminders that the perverse notion of colonial discovery is inherently tied to erasure. For the colonial deaf form, compared to a life form, the colonial deaf form cares not to know, it cares only to own. And ownership, and the so-called right to ownership that the CICC, our court, fundamentally rejects, equals death. Honoring non-human ecosystem workers as comrades. This is a key political recognition for the CICC, the Court for Intergenerational Climate Crimes, that emphasizes interdependent struggle against the reductive regime of rights that dominates our present legal institution. If one harms comrade river, one harms all comrades, animals, plants, humans that live in interdependency with that river. How can rights ever be individual? How can rights ever only be human or only animal, when the reality of our struggle as ecosystem workers is one in which our collective self-determination so fundamentally relies on one another? We are comrades across the human and non-human world because we are part of an existential struggle, a struggle between the defense of living worlds, past, present and future, against the racial ecocidal capitalist death form. If Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future would exist, we, the Court for Intergenerational Climate Crimes, could have been one of its institutions. But certainly because cosmic fiction exists, I'm able as an artist and cultural worker to build and expand on its imaginative propositions and try to translate them into new emancipatory organizational forms of many world building. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you so much for this intervention, Jonas. I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. I maybe want to start with one of them. There is one word that is very important in your work, and that's the one of propaganda. You talk to us about it now, and you talk to us about, like this importance of who emits this propaganda and why. And I'd like to ask you if you could expand of why you are so attached to this word.
Attached to the word propaganda. For me, as an artist and propaganda researcher, the word propaganda relates to the efforts of reality construction. The field of propaganda is the field of world making. It's the way in which infrastructures, narratives, and imagination intersect to create new realities, new normative realities. I don't think that there is a world without propaganda. I think the world is the product of a confrontation between different propagandas. And that it is essential that we propagate, in an emancipatory sense, alternative imaginaries, alternative futurities that can counter the apocalyptic normative reality that we are currently facing, that sells us the demise of our world, the ecosystem collapse we are experiencing, as somehow the least of the worst options available to us. And it's interesting, of course, that the historical word propaganda comes from biology, that it relates to propagation, the propagation of animals, of plants. So I believe in the possibility of an emancipatory, transformative propaganda. The propagation of possibility, the propagation of a world of many worlds, the propagation of transformative realities in which we might become things that we cannot even imagine in our current conditions of oppression. This for me is where what I try to contribute to with my work.
That's because that's a very beautiful answer on how you stress the importance of propaganda rather than fiction, let's say, because of this. Although, could what you're trying to do with this term propaganda, could you use the term fiction instead? And if not, why not? What is not enough in fiction for you?
I don't think fiction is fiction. I think the moment that we imagine something, it already belongs to the possibility of reality construction, which I think is the relative power of imagination. As artists and cultural workers, we do not have the executive power the way that the political class might have it, but we have the power of imagination, and that has a potentially oppressive dimension, and it has a potentially emancipatory dimension. That the moment that we plant these time seeds, the moment we bring the imagination into the public, we plant the time seeds. It might not happen now, it might not manifest now, it might not manifest within the regimes that we currently occupy, but these time seeds, they travel, and once imagined, they wait until their moment of becoming material reality.
Thank you so much. I am sure we have time for more questions, if there are questions. Yeah, Louvain.
Thank you very much. I would only very simply like to know how we can apply to the Interplanetary Society.
Apply to the Interplanetary Species Society? Well, I mean, after having listened to you yesterday, I'm hereby welcoming you as part of our interplanetary cooperative.
Are there other questions that we're not seeing? Well, anyways, so now maybe it's Mahan. Yeah, please. If you can bring the clean mic.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jonas. That was fantastic. I'm just really caught by the idea of time seeds, because it's, I mean, okay, I'm caught by many ideas, but it's interesting that I'm just wondering, is your institution concerned with how long it takes for fictions to realize themselves? Because I understand that you take this temporal aspect into account, that, okay, projection is not enough, we need organization, we need timeline, we need to pragmatically approach time seeds, we need to take care of them. But are you concerned with how long it takes? Do you set deadlines for interplanetary or intraplanetary plans that you set? How do you deal with the time of the time seeds?
With the question of time, yes. I mean, maybe it accounts even more in the case of the Court for Intergenerational Climate Crimes, because we're dealing with a crisis that is so pertinent that it always feels like we are out of time. And the maddening realization that we are out of time while burning time. Like we burn the fossils, we are burning time. We are burning millions of years. And the IPCC tells us we have 10 more years. In ancestors of indigenous communities will tell you we never had 10 years, and that time was never given to us. Our world was always ending. And it has been ending for the last 400 years. So I think the question of time you're raising is really pertinent. I think that it's important to acknowledge both urgencies of the present, and also to acknowledge that so much of our imaginaries of what the world could be are inherited futures. So when that image of a plant raising the red banner, it comes into being now, we're talking about an image of so many decades ago, made within a regime that had very little to do with recognizing non-humans as comradely agents, as revolutionary agents in their own rights. But the time seed was waiting until the moment in which it could manifest. And I think now, even on the legal front, we are facing some really serious battles in terms of recognition of non-human agents as juridical actors. So I think we have to recognize that our struggle takes place through these different times, through inherited futures that are past futures, that are our potential presents, that we are time seed planters for those who come after us, if the future holds any history. And the notion of urgency and the demand of 1 million more years go somehow hand in hand. The urgency of the here and now, and the necessity to think of ourselves intergenerationally, and to break with the extremely limited imagination of the political class, the children of my children. And this is the future. What a terrible, perversely short period of time. What if we think of the Earth memory inheritance? Can we not at least ask for 1 million more years? I mean, our neo-constructivist Ammonite comrades at least proposes 100 million years. Can we at least demand for 1 million more years? So I think it's between the strange struggle, chronopolitical struggle, that is between the absolute urgency of the here and now to achieve everything that we possibly can to make meaningful survival possible, and simultaneously insist that the arena of the political class, of those who are making our futures impossible, is not our arena. For us, it's 1 million more years, minimum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonas, and that's a really brilliant point with which you're finishing, which is not only like when we were talking about this symposium, we were really thinking of how there is a colonization of time as well that happens through the current system, and how science fiction can help with dealing with this very condition of time being colonized as well, future being colonized. And so that's really a beautiful echo between your two talks, actually. Thank you again. We're going to go through a quick break right now, maybe 5 minutes, because we're a bit late on schedule, and we'll come back for the last session right now. Merci.
Thank you.